In this video, we're exploring the top 10 U.S. cities facing water scarcity, a critical issue impacting real estate, urban planning, and the cost of living. Water stress is no longer theoretical. It's reshaping city budgets, local laws, and daily life across the country. Some of these cities sit next to oceans, rivers, or massive reservoirs and look like they should never worry about water. Others are booming inland metros built on the assumption that water infrastructure would always keep up with growth. That assumption is cracking because water scarcity doesn't always mean empty taps. Sometimes it means saltwater contaminating drinking supplies. Sometimes it means legal battles between states. Sometimes it means reservoirs shrinking into bathtub rings. Sometimes it means stricter conservation rules slowing down development. And sometimes it means the unthinkable: construction effectively pausing because the water to support long-term growth simply isn't available. Stay until the end. City number 1 has already crossed that line in a way that should make every growing region rethink real estate. If you value deep, independent analysis like this, subscribe to Housing Watch channel. Now, let's get started. Number 10. Atlanta, Georgia. Unlike coastal cities, Atlanta isn't battling the ocean. It's battling politics over a shared river system that doesn't belong to one city, even as Atlanta continues to grow. The city sits at the heart of the three-state water wars, a long-running dispute between Georgia, Alabama, and Florida over the Apalachicola-Chattahoochee-Flint (ACF) basin. This basin isn't just a feature on a map, it's a lifeline, supplying drinking water, power generation, agriculture, and ecosystems downstream. Every drought year tightens that lifeline, and Atlanta depends heavily on Lake Lanier and connected sources. Rapid population growth intensifies demand, which is where political risk becomes real. Water disputes rarely end with press statements. They conclude in court rulings, negotiated limits, or emergency restrictions when conditions worsen. What makes Atlanta particularly vulnerable is that water stress isn't just about rainfall, it's about governance. Even with efficiency measures and planning, the city can't control legal battles. Neighboring states and downstream users can challenge water withdrawals, and litigation can drag on for years. During droughts, conflicts intensify as consequences become visible. This has direct effects on housing and development. Atlanta's growth relies on new jobs, subdivisions, and expanding suburbs, but constrained water access can first show up as permitting delays, stricter connection rules, higher infrastructure costs, or developers pausing projects due to uncertainty. Atlanta ranks number 9 because it illustrates a key lesson. A booming metro can appear unstoppable, but if its water comes from a contested basin, the foundation beneath that growth is far more fragile than the skyline suggests. Number 9. Miami, Florida. Miami feels almost ironic as a starting point because water surrounds the city on all sides. The Atlantic stretches endlessly to the east, while Biscayne Bay frames the skyline like a postcard. With so much water, you might assume scarcity is impossible. But Miami isn't struggling with a lack of water. It's struggling with the wrong water. The region depends heavily on the Biscayne Aquifer, a shallow layer of porous limestone that stores rainwater and supplies drinking water for millions. For decades, it functioned quietly like a natural underground reservoir. But rising sea levels have changed the dynamics. Salt water doesn't need to appear on the surface to cause damage. It pushes inland underground, creeping through the limestone like an invisible wedge. This process, called saltwater intrusion, turns fresh water into a resource that requires expensive treatment to be usable. Once an aquifer is contaminated at scale, it cannot be restored quickly. This isn't like refilling a reservoir after a rainy season. Now, Consider the impact on real estate. Miami has built a luxury identity around waterfront living, high-rise condos, and multi-million-dollar homes, assuming engineering can always outsmart nature. But water security is not just a climate issue, it's a financial one. Protecting an aquifer requires infrastructure, barriers, pumping controls, and long-term investments that ultimately affect bills and taxes. Miami ranks number 10 because its water risk is hidden behind an illusion of abundance. There's water everywhere, yet the most critical supply is quietly under pressure. Next, we leave the coastline and head inland, where the water crisis takes a very different form: conflict rather than intrusion. Number 8. Denver, Colorado. At first glance, Denver seems like a city that should never worry about water. Surrounded by mountains, with snow every winter, it feels as if the Rockies store water like a bank stores money. But Denver's growth has always relied on a bold strategy: capturing mountain runoff and transporting it to where people live. For decades, this worked because the snowpack acted as natural storage. Winter snow fell, spring melt arrived, and reservoirs refilled. The problem is that the baseline is changing. Snowpack is becoming more variable, and runoff timing is shifting, making the system less predictable. Even with strong legal water rights, Denver faces the same physical constraints as everyone else. Rights determine priority, not supply. The city's vulnerability isn't immediate scarcity. It's being anchored to climate conditions that no longer follow historical patterns. Stress in the Colorado River Basin, broader regional drought trends, and declining snowpack reliability point to a future where water management is costlier and more restrictive. That directly affects housing. Infrastructure investments raise rates, conservation rules become normal, outdoor watering limits reshape suburban lifestyles, landscaping adapts, and new developments face stricter standards. Residents not only pay more, they live differently. Denver's identity, lifestyle, jobs, quality of life, is tied to growth. If water costs rise and restrictions tighten, the city must deliver that promise under constrained conditions. Markets respond to these realities, pricing in the risk. Denver shows that even mountain-adjacent cities can face serious water vulnerabilities when their long-term foundation, snowmelt, becomes less reliable each year. Number 7. San Antonio, Texas. San Antonio's water risk is especially dangerous because it is mostly invisible. There are no dramatic lake retreats, no bathtub rings, and no viral shoreline photos. The pressure exists underground. The city relies heavily on the Edwards Aquifer, a massive limestone system that has supplied clean, reliable water for generations. For decades, this felt like a blessing, providing dependable flow and a foundation that made growth feel safe. But population growth accelerates stress. When extraction exceeds recharge, the aquifer declines. The region has monitoring thresholds and conservation triggers for a reason. When levels drop to certain markers, restrictions automatically intensify. These rules assume drought cycles will return, and when they do, the system tightens. This becomes a real estate issue because the aquifer is a single point of failure. If levels fall, the city can't import unlimited water quickly without enormous costs and long timelines. Diversifying supply through pipelines, alternative sources, or storage expansion is expensive, and higher water costs increase rates. Combine this with rising home prices, insurance, property taxes, and living costs, and buyers become more sensitive, while renters gain mobility. Businesses also weigh operating costs, and when expenses rise, long-term growth projections change. The invisible nature of the crisis adds a psychological layer. People don't react until signals become obvious. One year, everything seems fine. The next, restrictions intensify, rates increase, and aquifer stress dominates headlines. Buyers start asking new questions, and markets dislike uncertainty. San Antonio can continue to grow, but the Edwards Aquifer is the gatekeeper, and when gatekeepers are stressed, growth becomes conditional, not automatic. Number 6. Austin, Texas. Austin has been one of America's fastest-growing cities, fueled by tech expansion, corporate relocations, and a lifestyle brand that made people believe the future was already here. At first glance, Austin doesn't appear water-stressed. A river winds through downtown, lakes frame the hills, and waterfront homes promise a dream of permanence. But the river that defines Austin is not a guarantee. It's a managed system dependent on rainfall and reservoir storage. When rain fails and heat intensifies, reservoirs drop, shorelines recede, and docks sit on dry ground, changes that even casual residents notice. The deeper challenge is that Austin is growing into its own demand problem. Each new wave of residents increases baseline water use, and hotter temperatures raise cooling demand while accelerating evaporation. This combination stresses the system. When restrictions appear, weekly watering limits, reduced outdoor use, they are more than rules. They signal shrinking buffers. Buyers begin to question the reliability of lake views and long-term costs, not just purchase price. As the city tightens supply, investments increase, and monthly water bills grow alongside taxes, insurance, and mortgage payments. In a market already stretched for affordability, this extra pressure matters. Water stress doesn't make Austin undesirable, but it forces the market to price lifestyle with a risk discount, reshaping what buyers are willing to pay. Number 5. Salt Lake City, Utah. Salt Lake City sits beside a symbol of massive water loss, the Great Salt Lake, which has been shrinking for years. Its decline reflects a broader regional imbalance. Rivers that once fed the lake have been diverted for agriculture and urban growth, while ongoing drought adds further pressure. What makes this crisis unique is that it's not just about water availability, it's about livability. As the lake retreats, exposed lake beds become dust sources. Winds lift this sediment, creating regional air quality and public health risks. That directly affects how families perceive the area and how investors evaluate long-term property value. Water becomes a housing issue through perception. People can adapt to conservation or xeriscaping, but concerns about dust and health can shift desirability. Salt Lake City is also experiencing rapid growth, which increases demand and accelerates strain on natural systems. Reduced flows cause the lake to shrink further, creating a feedback loop that drives political pressure, stricter regulations, rising water rates, permanent conservation measures, and tighter development standards. In this environment, buyers don't disappear suddenly. They become selective, factoring in long-term livability. Builders face more regulation, while insurance and health concerns influence decisions. The market reacts slowly but steadily. Salt Lake City sits at the intersection of resource stress and public confidence, and when confidence cracks, housing markets respond. Number 4. Los Angeles, California. Los Angeles is the engineered miracle of American urbanization, a massive metro that exists at this scale only because water was imported at scale. But imported water is only as reliable as the systems that deliver it. LA depends on supply lines stretching far beyond its natural environment, from Sierra Nevada snowpack to distant river systems and statewide infrastructure networks. When drought hits, allocations tighten, and when allocations tighten, restrictions arrive. As restrictions become the norm, the housing story shifts from abundance to management. This is not a minor issue. Los Angeles real estate is a multi-trillion-dollar ecosystem built on the assumption that water networks will function at full capacity. Climate variability, clustered dry years, unpredictable snowpack, and rising supply costs stress that system. LA is investing in recycling, stormwater capture, and groundwater replenishment. But these projects take time, and time is expensive. When systems tighten, cities respond with policy, outdoor watering limits, conservation enforcement, landscaping rules, and stricter development standards. Housing feels the impact not through sudden collapse, but through rising costs and friction. Water rates climb, construction costs increase, homeowners adjust landscaping, buyers consider long-term operating expenses, and investors question affordability and livability over decades. The biggest risk isn't that LA disappears, it's that living there becomes heavier, with higher bills, stricter rules, and more infrastructure spending. As life becomes heavier, the buyer pool narrows, making a market that relies on constant demand more sensitive to recessions, job shocks, and interest rates. Los Angeles illustrates how water stress scales into economic risk. Because in a city, this large, massive costs inevitably influence housing demand. Number 3. Las Vegas, Nevada. Las Vegas has become the symbol of the modern drought era. The city relies heavily on Lake Mead, which has dramatically declined, showing the world what a shrinking reservoir looks like when the drop becomes impossible to ignore. The famous bathtub ring is not just a photo, it's a warning carved into stone. As water levels fell, Las Vegas built deeper intake infrastructure to reach water even if the lake drops further. That's survival engineering. The city also implemented aggressive conservation measures, including strict limits on decorative grass and incentives to replace lawns with desert landscaping. Per capita water use has fallen, showing efficiency gains, but conservation alone cannot refill a reservoir when the larger river system is under stress. This creates a housing risk not of immediate disappearance, but of long-term confidence. Growth is possible, but it becomes fragile when supply is tight. Costs rise, restrictions become permanent, developers face new standards, and investors factor in a risk premium, quietly discounting prices across the market. Las Vegas also depends on tourism and the service economy. So if a recession hits while water costs rise, housing sensitivity doubles. Real estate depends on confidence, which is tested each time the lake dominates headlines. By 2026, buyers expect permanent rules, not temporary drought measures, making builders more cautious, lenders more skeptical, and homeowners more aware that long-term value depends on a reservoir they cannot control. Las Vegas represents the edge case that has become the new normal. The city can buy time, but time comes at a price. And once that price rises, the market questions whether old growth assumptions still hold. Number 2. San Diego, California. San Diego is often sold as paradise. Premium weather, coastal lifestyle, and a real estate market that feels protected by sheer desirability. But the city sits at the end of the water pipeline, relying on imported water, which makes its security dependent on external systems that are already overextended. To reduce vulnerability, San Diego has invested heavily in desalination, turning ocean water into drinking water. While technically impressive, desalination is energy-intensive and expensive, spreading costs across households. That means higher water rates in a city where housing affordability is already stretched. Water stress becomes a housing issue through monthly burdens. When mortgage or rent is high, rising utility bills reduce disposable income and shift household behavior. Desalination helps, but it does not eliminate dependency. San Diego remains exposed to import reductions, drought conditions, and allocation conflicts across the West. Buyers remain interested but become selective. Renters negotiate harder, and homeowners adjust living patterns. Landscaping norms change, and the overall cost of living rises. As costs increase, the market becomes more sensitive to job changes, interest rate shifts, and economic slowdowns. Water-related expenses push renters to the county edges, lengthening commutes and adding hidden costs. Over time, this affects who can buy, who can stay, and how quickly demand rebounds after economic shocks. San Diego illustrates a paradox. Solutions like desalination enhance resilience, but make living more expensive. The market stays desirable, yet under the surface, it becomes fragile and income-restricted. Number 1. Phoenix, Arizona. Phoenix earns the top spot because it marks the point where water scarcity stopped being a discussion and became a force actively reshaping growth. The city was built on an engineering lifeline, the Central Arizona Project, which transported Colorado River water across the desert and enabled large-scale development. When shortages in the Colorado River deepened, Arizona's allocation was reduced, forcing reliance on groundwater assumptions. But those assumptions soon collided with reality. The Assured Water Supply Framework requires long-term proof of water for new developments. Updated modeling showed that groundwater availability could not support some planned growth under the long-term standard, and approvals and planning shifted. The consequence was clear. Growth was no longer automatic. Phoenix is crucial because it demonstrates how water directly affects housing expansion, not as a distant climate story, but as a permitting and planning issue influencing land values, builder pipelines, local economies, and homeowner confidence. The ripple effects spread beyond one suburb. Developer pauses slow trades, which reduces local spending, and uncertainty around future rooftops challenges city budget assumptions. Growth is more than housing, it's the entire ecosystem around it. Homeowners start asking hard questions. If future growth is uncertain, does tighter water management increase monthly burdens or limit future buyer demand? Once water security becomes a deal term rather than a background detail, Phoenix is priced not for limitless expansion, but as a city learning its limits.